It's now 6 weeks since monsoonal flooding hit Pakistan. It's estimated that 21 million people have been affected by the floods. At least 10 million are still without shelter, and 1.2 million homes have been destroyed. Not surprisingly, given those incredible statistics, aid agencies are still struggling to provide food, water and medication to those in need. Last week, Pakistan's government conceded that over 1 million people have still received no help at all. And concerns continue that Islamic extremist groups could fill the void, providing aid and potentially recruiting terrorists along the way. And reporter Liz Jackson joins me in the breakfast studio. Liz, good morning.
Good morning, Fran.
Liz, you travelled to flood-affected areas in Pakistan for this story. You went to the Swat Valley, for instance, an area which has for a long time been very dangerous given the power struggle that's been going on there between the government troops and the Taliban. Give us a sense of how that area has been affected by the floods, can you?
Well, I think the infrastructure damage is the most devastating for that particular part because, of course, it's mountainous and there were just major mudslides. I mean, whole villages were just swept away without warning. I mean, every single bridge was damaged. So, I mean, people were completely isolated, and that made it extremely difficult and remains extremely difficult to deliver aid to that part of the country. And I mean, also there are serious security concerns. I mean, there was a military crackdown 18 months ago which sort of suppressed overt Taliban activity. But if you talk to an agency like UNICEF, I mean, they can only go for short periods of time. They can't stay.
Because of the security situation?
Precisely because of the security situation. And it means that, I mean, the way they put it is that group of people remain a very difficult group to reach. I mean, we went there with the US chopper. I mean, it stays on the ground, engine running. You're left there. Pakistan military are extremely worried about letting you out of Kalam, which is the village that we were in, high up in the Swat Valley. Pretty as a picture, I have to tell you. I mean, in a sense, you've got this gorgeous environment and then these devastated people. And I mean, that's, as I say, the major problem up north is devastation of infrastructure, difficulty of access and security problems in terms of delivering aid.
And in terms of just the security problems, because there was also a threat issued by some of the terrorist-linked groups about the security situation, have there been examples, and perhaps there have, I just haven't heard them, of aid workers being abducted, being injured, being...
No. I mean, there's still, I mean, in the time that we were in Peshawar, I think was 36 hours. The Taliban, there was a sort of incident with the Taliban firing near the US embassy. The week before, there'd been a suicide bombing in Peshawar. But that threat, which was a reported threat, I mean, the Taliban themselves did not appear and say, we will attack foreign aid workers. But that was in the time that we were there. And it certainly made everyone more tense because there was a reported threat that foreign aid workers assisting flood victims would be the subject of attack. But there have been none.
Now, just listening to you and saying we were allowed out there under this close cordon, we were 36 hours here and there. I mean, this is a story of a scale that impossible to imagine, I think, unless you see it with your own eyes. But how do you tell a story like this with millions, 21 million people involved? Is the only way to do that to follow a couple of individual stories?
Well, I think everywhere we went, clearly we spoke to a number of individuals. I mean, as many as we could in the time that we had. And the story has a sort of depressing familiarity about it in a way because the people, as I'm sure listeners will appreciate, the people most affected by these are the poorer people because they're the poor farmers, they're on the low-level lands, they're subsistence farmers, they're tenant farmers, and their livelihood has simply been washed away, as well as their homes, as well as their livestock. The sense that I got of that, which was the strongest, is we in fact arrived in the southern city of Succa, which I think people will have heard of from Sally Sarah's reports. And we arrived at night and you come out of the airport and the trip, just driving along the road to the city, is just densely populated with people who are homeless. I mean, often the only thing they have is their bed because it floats. And they're there with whatever livestock they've been able to save. And of course, more than 1 million livestock, which is people's backbone, have been killed. And they're just living there by the side of the road. And they're begging you as you go past. I mean, they're saying, help us, help us. They're showing their cards that say, I come from this village and you know it's gone. I'm a genuine flood victim. And, you know, because there's a whole sort of, it's a poor country anyway. So that was, you know, in terms of getting impact from the minute that you arrive, that's the way it impacts.
And of course, contained in that very scenario you just painted is the direct impact, but also the future. These people can't see their future. Pakistan's government has conceded that more than 1 million people have so far received no assistance, and there are concerns that terrorist groups will fill that void and provide aid. Did you see that on the ground happening?
Well, we decided to look at that in the southern Punjab, which is sort of in the middle. You know, there's a northern province, and the floods came down in the Punjab, which is the agricultural heartland. And just as an aside, I mean, devastation for the economy apart from the people, because that is the breadbasket. That's the export income, you know.
It's been washed away.
But we went out with one group in particular, Jawad Dawa, which are closely aligned. I think most listeners might have heard of Lashkar-e-Toiba, probably not Jawad Dama, but regarded as essentially the same group, responsible for attack on the Indian Parliament, responsible for Mumbai bombings. Just to, in a sense, see what it amounted to. And it's a sort of complicated story, Fran, but it's part of the contradiction, in a sense, I think, of Pakistan, that they're operating quite openly. We went out with them. We went to some of the islands where villagers have chosen to remain marooned rather than live by the side of the road, and ask them their views. And they said, well, they'd never heard of Jawad Dama before, but they were very grateful now.
But that's part of the thing, isn't it? I noticed that in the story you spoke to Samina Ahmed from the International Crisis Group in Pakistan, who says that banned terrorist groups like Lashkar-e-Toiba sometimes just simply change their names. Let's have a listen.
This is what happens repeatedly. These groups are banned, they change their name, they continue to operate, they're banned again after another terror attack, they change their name. So what's important is that the government should say, look, any group that's been banned under any name, if it reemerges under any name, we're not going to allow it to operate. They need to put their foot down. But can they is another issue.
And should they? I mean, changing a name is one thing, terrorist links is another, but if they're providing basic aid and vital aid, people want it, need it.
Well, it's a big debate in Pakistan. I mean, precisely, we spoke with Imran Khan about it. He's, of course, not just a former cricketer, he's the leader of an opposition party. I mean, his view is it's a joke and scoffs at the notion that people will become terrorists. You know, and I think you do have to keep it in proportion. I think that's true. And I think but what I think Samina Ahmed says, which is critically true, is it's very, very difficult for complicated political reasons that perhaps are too long for us to go in, for the government to move against a group which has a lot of support. I mean, so has a lot of support, is providing relief in a really difficult time. You know, that's not an easy ask. And of course there is support, as we all know, from certain sectors of the Pakistan community for that kind of group.
But also, Liz, difficult for the Pakistan government to criticise when it's being so heavily criticised for being too slow in everything. I mean, the president even come home for a week. What is your sense, because we've spoken to UNICEF and others on this program about the slow delivery of aid, what is your sense of why the flow of aid is so slow?
We asked a number of people that, and I think there's a concern about Pakistan as a government actually being able to handle that money in a proper fashion. And I mean, Pakistani commentators themselves told us, don't give money to the government, give money to your favourite NGO. You know, give money to whoever it is, whether it was World Vision or CARE or Save the Children or UNICEF, because they're far short. I mean, UNICEF will tell you, and I'm sure you've spoken with them, that they've delivered fresh water and they tell you proudly 3 million people, but then they tell you there are 5 million who aren't. And water is fresh water and clean is absolutely critical. I mean, the major concern now is disease and malnutrition, and the major vulnerable group are children under 5, and those are the people who are dying now.
Okay, Liz, thanks very much for joining us. We look forward to your report. That's Liz Jackson, and her report on Four Corners is called After the Deluge. It's 21 past 8.